Welcome to Backpacker Radio, presented by The Trek, brought to you by Onyx Backcountry. I am your co-host, Zach Badger Davis, and sitting to my right today is...
Hi, I'm Julianachauncey, a.k.a. Chaunce.
Chaunce, question of the day. What's an injury you have that always comes back?
This is hard because I don't really, push myself to... I guess I hike, but I don't really, push myself to physical extremes in, a lot of ways that would cause injury, I don't think.
You're also of the age where injuries don't just happen for no reason.
Well, I've also, never broken anything, never sprained anything. So
You've never broken a bone?
No, I'm a very cautious person.
You've never sprained an ankle, even through hiking?
I've got rubber ankles.
That is insane to me.
Yeah, so there's just, nothing that's, already sensitive. But,
Are you Gumby? How is that possible?
I oftentimes think so. I really roll my ankles a lot, and nothing's ever happened. But I can put, stress. Stress comes back a lot, and I don't like that. Weight gain, that comes back a lot. I don't like that either. There's, a lot of reoccurring things like those that also are, injuries of my self-esteem.
Good improv.
Thanks.
I can't believe you don't have an injury. I'm trying to think. Even as someone in my late 20s, I had a list of injuries, but...
Sometimes my tummy hurts.
There you go, an inside injury.
Yeah.
What
other injuries are there?
Your pride is a good one. Your pride is a great one.
Thanks.
Mine is way too fitting, and I didn't even write this question. Thanks, Elise, for this layup here, but my shoulder. I have junky shoulders. Our guest today is actually the person responsible for fixing my junky shoulder.
Huh.
A junky shoulder plus CrossFit is not a good combination.
I'm shocked you didn't go with your knees, honestly. I thought that was a shit.
You know what's crazy? 2 ACL reconstructions, a meniscectomy. Is that the right term?
Yep.
So I'm missing part of the cartilage in one of my knees, actually both my knees. And my knees really don't bother me. My left knee creaks when I do that, when I move at all, but it doesn't bring any pain. It's just loud.
Okay.
I think it's just scar tissue. I don't know. Maybe there's also something about redheads not feeling pain. So maybe I'm not getting the signals that other people would be getting, but my knees don't bother me that much.
Cool. Well, that's nice.
Yeah.
Poor shoulder, though.
Yeah. So junky shoulder. Let's go. I don't have any reminders. So let's go to our interview. Cool. Very excited about this one, as are you guys, based on the number of questions that we got for this. He is Dr. I never knew that you were a doctor. I learned that on your website. Dr. Freeborn Mondello is very focused on physical therapy as a tool to help patients toward holistic wellness and pain-free movement. He graduated with a doctorate at Regis University in 2014 and practiced physical therapy all over the country for 4 years before settling in Golden, Colorado to open his own practice, Run Free PT. First and foremost, thank you so much for finally doing this.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Of course. So I know we chatted quite a bit before the show, but I did not talk about this at all. We've been friends for years now, and I didn't know the extent of your athletic feats. You've done multiple Ironmans.
I have.
The full Ironman.
The full 3 of them.
Okay. I imagine most people listening are familiar with that, but can you give us the details of what an Ironman race is?
Yeah. So, I think when you hear Ironman, most people think Kona, which is the world championships that you see on TV. But ultimately, Ironman is a distance, so it's a 2.4 mile swim. So that's a bad idea to start with, especially for a college wrestler.
Chaunce, what's the furthest you've ever swam?
Oh, I had to swim 12 laps back and forth in an Olympic-sized pool once to get my lifeguarding test passed.
I grew up with a pool, and I don't think I've done that.
Well, they're supposed to make you swim with different strokes during it, but because it was for a kids' camp and they really just needed lifeguards, they didn't tell me I had to swim any certain way, so I doggy paddled all 12 laps.
Okay, sorry.
That's good.
Just the scale of 2.4 miles.
It's good to put it in perspective, right? So I think it's 4,000 meters or something. So
that's
your pool's
exhausting.
25 meters usually, unless you have a pro pool. And then you bike 112 miles, so you're still getting warmed up. And for a fairly average Ironman like me, 8 hours into your day, you start a marathon, 26.2 miles. So,
So that only takes 8 hours up until the marathon?
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, so you have 17 hours to finish the whole thing, or you're DNF. So for me, I was right around, all of my Ironmans are right around that 12-hour total mark, which is still a long freaking day. But
That's impressive. So
I'm a terrible swimmer. I'm a pretty fast biker. And then on an Ironman, you survive a marathon.
Yeah.
Walk, jog, cry.
So does that mean you did the marathon in 4 hours?
No, I did the bike really fast. Well, I guess, yeah, you're right. So maybe I did do the marathon in about 4 hours. Yeah.
I've done
so I was right
3
around
marathons,
4 hours.
and 4 hours has always been my goal, and I've gotten close a couple of times, but never eclipsed it.
So, because I mean, I'm theoretically a decent marathoner. Like, I've run a 3:20 marathon with the goal of qualifying for Boston, but that's like a 3:05 or something, which I haven't gotten to. So I always figured I could go like 3:45 somewhere, but I've never done it on an Ironman. It's too hard.
Yeah. And you've done how many Ironmans?
3 Ironmans.
Oh, that's insane.
Yeah.
I had no idea.
Yeah.
What is the chafe situation like when you're coming out of a 2.5 mile swim and hopping on a bike saddle?
Yeah. So don't make, that is a good question. Don't make the mistake of avoiding the Vaseline. So you come out and they've got strippers standing there.
That sounds great.
Yeah, it sounds great. They're actually they're aids that help you tear your wetsuit off because you're so wrecked. And then the next stage, there's a bunch of like volunteers standing there, literally with like gallon tubs of Vaseline that will just scrape it, and then there's sunscreen. So it's like these stages of recovering and preparing. Yes, lots of Vaseline in every imaginable location. I mean,
is your outfit,
you guys
just
can
like,
probably relate, I suppose.
Oh yeah, no. The reason I was going to ask is because like I've ruined so many of my hiking shorts with grease stains.
Completely, yep.
So are you just covered in grease stains from head to toe?
Completely, yeah. I mean, the spandex though, it comes out of a little easier than your real clothes, right?
Yeah.
But yeah,
that's funny. Damn, that's insane. So, which iron? Like, what locations?
Well, so I started. I was graduating with my doctorate in 2014, and me and my wife had just started dating, and so we came to this agreement. I would sign up for an Ironman that I'd always wanted to do if she signed up for a marathon. So I signed up for Boulder 2014, which was like 2 months after graduating with my doctorate. So that was a great prep season, as you can imagine. A year later, I did Coeur d'Alene, the hottest day in history in Coeur d'Alene, 106 degrees.
Whoa.
And then I did Arizona the next year, which is in November, so that one was more pleasant actually weather-wise.
An Ironman in 106 degrees.
Yeah, we thought they'd cancel it, but they let us go. They brought the like ice chest from the grocery store. They literally loaded the whole white chest up and put them at aid stations. I think it ended up being like 20,000 pounds of ice they handed out that day.
I feel like I'd just be shoving it in my spandex.
Yeah.
Like.
I mean, most people didn't finish. It was there's like 40% didn't finish. It was the biggest DNF rate I think they've ever had.
Yeah. How many people get heat stroke during that?
A lot. I think that it was so hot that day that people quit before they got there. Like on an 85 degree day in Boulder, a lot of people get pulled. 106 degrees, people literally, I was on the bike course and there's people sitting under a tree who I think are fans, and you go by and they've got race numbers on and they just pulled over. Or like my family heard people finish the bike and hand off their bike and tell the race directors, we're not running, we're done. Just like no more.
Did you consider throwing in the towel?
No, I mean, so my real background is a wrestler. So I wrestled for 20 years.
So torture is what
torture, and I don't know how to quit.
Yeah.
And so that was incomprehensible to me to quit. I probably would have, I mean, they would have literally put me in the ambulance and taken me to the hospital before I quit. The worst part about that course, though, is you do 2 laps on the run, and the end of lap 1 is like 50 yards from the finish line. And when you're in my speed, there's lots of people already finishing, and you hear the bells and the cheers, and you've got 13 more miles to go back into. So, yeah.
That's torture.
So, yeah.
I feel like more than any other sport, wrestling is a sport that prides itself in torture. Like, you don't see that in any other... I'm just relating to what I knew from my high school friends.
Yeah.
But they would starve themselves. I had one friend that would suck on a lifesaver because he wasn't allowed to eat.
Right.
He'd suck on a lifesaver and then spit out the juice just to get some flavor in his mouth.
Sure.
The things that you guys go through to make weight for, it's insane.
Yeah, it's a different kind of sport. I'd say the mindset set me up well for succeeding in a lot of things in life and not quitting. It also is hard to overcome some of that when I'm learning to be a physical therapist and do things properly. I mean, I once wrestled after losing 14 pounds that day to weigh in.
How did you lose 14 pounds that day?
Well, it's technically not allowed in the rules, but you put on plastic suits, and then you take the bike into a sauna or steam room, and then you spend hours exercising. Wow. I mean, you weigh in and you gain 6 or 8 pounds back literally in the next 20 minutes. And then you got to hope you don't puke, because you weigh in and you have to wrestle an hour later so that people don't lose too much weight. But and it's different. I mean, they're trying to make it a safer, healthier sport. But yeah, by default, we've always prided ourselves on going harder is the solution. That's not always true, but that is certainly the mentality in the wrestling world.
Yeah, unlike any other sport too.
Yeah.
And then the other thing I noticed in your background, I don't think we've ever chatted about this, is that you're a champion mountain biker.
Yeah. So, and so I grew up in rural New Mexico in the middle of nowhere, and my backyard was the Gila National Forest. We were talking about this before the show a little bit. And so I started racing. I mean, I finished last in my first race, but I was like 11 years old. I was the youngest one out there. I remember it was another rainstorm. So it was a rainstorm. They actually came out on the 4-wheelers looking for me. I made it, but I continued racing for years. I actually won the state title, and then I won a World Cup championship. And
oh shit!
So I was pretty good on a mountain bike. You guys are looking at me now as a fairly thick wrestler-looking guy. I was little. I wrestled 103 my freshman year of high school and weighed 95 pounds. Damn. So I was that skinny endurance athlete looking guy, except short too. So,
I'm always curious, how do you switch from excelling at a type 1 muscle fiber, like the endurance fiber, to a fast twitch fiber muscle, like type 2?
I mean, I think it's tough, and I think you look at, right, so you could look at my mountain biking, my wrestling, and say that is the transition that I made, but the reality is like at what level not at a pro level. We're all genetically gifted in one of those areas more than the other. And I think if we look at like the history of, say, Russian sports, they know stuff like that. And so they test their kids young and push you in a certain direction. And we could even now, some of the genetic testing that's come out, we can send in, and they're still figuring it out, like this DNA testing and stuff. But we're figuring out that, like, even if I want to be a strength athlete, sometimes it makes more sense for me to train a little more in the endurance nature, depending on my muscle fiber type. And it's way more specific than we can really completely nail down now. But I think that transition is not, I couldn't be the best, like I couldn't ever accomplish being a pro endurance athlete. I'm built more on the other side.
Even though you've completed 3 Ironman races.
Right, but so I'm completing those in 12 hours, and the winners are doing it in 8 or 9. 12 hours is, say, the top 10 or 20%.
Yeah.
But it's it's literally 3 or 4 hours behind the fast guys.
Yeah, I'm just impressed by anybody who can complete that, let alone in 106
It's more of a
degrees.
stubborn issue, maybe.
So you've had your muscle fiber types measured?
I have not gone through that process, but a lot of the pro level, and the research isn't great, so I don't know how accurate they can be at this point. But that's what we're trying to figure out. And so what you would do if you were truly testing, there are tests that you can test at a young age to see just what you respond better to: sprinting, plyometric jump. That kid that can just jump on a 3-foot box when he's 10 years old or what, like that kid's got the fast twitch muscle fibers. If you train him to be a sprinter or an Olympic lifter where it's this 1-rep explosion, he's going to probably excel much more than if you force him into being a marathon runner.
Sure.
So I think if you would have tested me at that age, even though I was an elite kid, I was also the kid that was homeschooled and rode my bike 6 hours a day because that's what I did for fun. So yeah, I dominated at a young age, but I was never going to the Tour de France or any pro level endurance thing.
Is there any science to support the ability to switch your muscle fiber types? Like, can you activate your type 1 if you're more type 2 dominant, or vice versa?
You can train more specifically for that, right? If you're an endurance guy with lots of slow twitch fibers, you can do lots of plyometric jumping and try to build that system up as much as you can. But it seems to be you're not going to add, there's kind of a set percentage, and so you're only going to accomplish so much going that route. Like, you're not going to turn yourself into the opposite kind of athlete.
Got it.
No amount of training is going to solve that for you.
But steroids.
Steroids. And for most of us, that doesn't matter, right? Unless you're like truly a pro level 1% tip of the spear. Like, can you become a strength athlete or an Ironman or a Thru-Hiker? Like, can you do both of those? Yeah. Like, I've shown that with my personal life, but not at the top 1%. Like,
Sure.
if you don't pick who you are and follow that with training, you're not going to get there.
So you mentioned that you grew up in the Gila National Forest
Yes.
and Silver City to be
Silver City.
That's amazing. So this is the CDT kickoff town.
Ah.
And you mentioned that your parents run a outfitter in Silver City.
Yeah, so Morningstar Screen Printing and Sporting Goods. So they've got all the outdoor gear from hiking poles to ultra shoes to other hiking brands, Merrell, and so they've been down there for, I think they just had their 25 or 30 year anniversary of the store.
Wow.
But if you go to downtown Silver City, they're literally unmissable.
Huh.
And they're heavily involved with the Thru-Hikers and the hiking community at this point.
Yeah. So you've been familiar with the CDT for a long time.
For a long time.
Yeah.
Literally my whole life. Yeah.
Did you see a lot of CDT hikers growing up?
Not that I remember. No,
Yeah.
it didn't. I don't know. Was it a thing back then? It doesn't seem like it in my mind.
It existed,
but
there's never been the surge of maybe in the last handful of years, like
Yeah.
when the CDT kickoff event became more popular. I think
Right.
there was a little bit of a bubble, but yeah, I think most years people are starting sparsely, and you probably wouldn't be able to tell them apart from somebody who's just like out for like a weekend
Right.
adventure. Like,
yeah, right. I mean, I grew up out there. I mean, backpacking for 1 to 7 days out in the Gila and on this all over the CDC. I mean, I've hiked it all over down there. But I don't remember that. Honestly, my first memorable encounter with through hiking was I spent a summer working in Hood River, which is a pull out point, right, for the PCT. Is
Right.
that correct?
Yeah.
And so I met a lot. Actually, I would treated some of the through hikers that would come through and come find our office, and so I worked with them some in that scenario, which was fun.
we got to talk about a mobile PT business. I think that would do
I'm in. It
Yeah.
sounds like a good next adventure,
Yeah.
especially
That would be
since
good.
we both have newborns. It's perfect timing.
Exactly.
Go to mile 100 of the trail, and everyone that just like injured themselves in the first 100
Indeed.
miles.
100%.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, with your athletic background, how did you get into physical therapy?
Yeah, so I mean that's interesting. Really, I mean my academic life started more as the typical dumb jock. Like I went to college to wrestle. Literally, I spent 20 years competing on a wrestling mat. And so I got through it, exercise science degree. I'm going to be a PE teacher. That was kind of the thought process. No real thought. It just was like I wanted to go wrestle. So I did. Graduated that and happened to finish school in Oregon, where you needed a master's degree to teach, which sounded like a stupid idea to me after all that.
Especially for a gym teacher.
Totally, like
Yeah.
it's absurd. So I
Yeah.
didn't do that. So I became a personal trainer, and I coached. I coached with the college I was at. And so I coached wrestling. I coached some club soccer teams. And so I was just involved in the strength and conditioning world, and then became a personal trainer. Ultimately, that path led to running a local YMCA, which in Ashland, Oregon is like the mecca of the town. I think Ashland has 20 or 30,000 people, and we had 12,000 members. So it was like the community center. So I did that for a few years, and it was like my dream job, I thought, but then I realized I'd kind of reached the pinnacle of what I could do, and I was bored, and people would always come in with like, my knee hurts, like, what can I do? I'm like, I don't know. I mean, I didn't, right? I could give them, as you see personal trainers do, like, well, why don't you try to stretch it or try to do this? And so I started to think I wanted to learn more. And my first thought was I was going to go get a master's in like exercise phys or sports science and do research on professional athletes. And then I realized like I also needed a degree if I was going to go back to school that could probably pay the bills and be a little more practical. And as I researched it, I figured out physical therapy actually is the absolute highest level of education you can get on the human body. I mean, when we do tests on like anatomy and biomechanics and all of that, the only people that can come close to understanding would be the orthopedic surgeons, and they tend to specialize more, like they do all knees or all shoulders. So really getting a doctorate in physical therapy would fulfill my interest in human performance and movement. And I figured it was time to challenge myself academically, because really at heart, maybe I'm more of a nerd, but I'd played the jock long enough. So went back to school. PT school is extremely hard to get into, like medical school type 800 applicants for 60 spots.
Wow.
Yeah, like insane. I mean, people told me I couldn't get in, but at 30, I went back to school, got my doctorate, and just kept following that path. But it really was I probably never became that fairly traditional medical type PT. It just wasn't in me. I was really just following my passion of movement and performance and human function. And so the process kind of led me to doing what I'm doing now, which is probably combining rehab and actual training and performance.
It's a very organic path.
Yeah.
Sorry, Chaunce, I'm dominating here.
Oh, that's fine. I was gonna ask if there was anything cool you learned while you were getting your doctorate that most people wouldn't know or like expect.
That's an interesting question. It's funny because my perspective, and I was sharing this with Zach at the beginning maybe, is that the human body, I mean, it's very complicated when you're getting your doctorate. And like, we go to anatomy lab and we dissect cadavers for 6 months and break it down to all these little miniature muscles. And if you Google, every day I treat somebody who's got a piriformis strain or some specific injury. I think for me, one of the coolest things that it reinforced, because I think this way anyways, but we really, if you're able to parse it down, you really learn that the body functions as one unit, and it's more of a cohesive unit than it is trying to figure out how to break it down, whether the surgeons or the other PT or someone you saw or even your personal trainer is like, well, we've got to work that quad muscle, and really you've got to work the full body, and it all works together so well. So I think getting to know, like, at the highest level of understanding of the human body and realizing that it's ultimately functionally much simpler than we try to make it, to me is a really cool thing, and it's really empowering for me and for my patients, and like for anybody that can come to understand that.
And I know we'll go way deeper on this a little bit later in the questioning, but to that point, how much of a role the neurology plays in the whole musculature system?
Well, so then that's where you get to the more complicated side of things, I think, because what we know, and this is a common conversation I have with patients that walk in the door, like, if we could remove/chop off your head right now, there would be no pain. You've had full range of motion. Like, it's not usually like a muscle length thing. Like, your quad is not usually shortened when you come in and say, I've got quad pain, or I've got a tight quad or hamstring or whatever. It's more a matter of the nervous system has been insulted, and your body's protection mode has decided, we're going to protect this part, and so we're going to shorten things, we're going to tighten things up. And if we could figure out how to treat the brain instead of the physical part, we could solve most of our physical symptoms. But you've got to tie them together, and my specialty is trying to use the physical side to affect the brain ultimately. But the brain and the nervous system are controlling everything. I mean, it's truly fascinating. I mean,
Yeah.
you could treat a lot of physical pain by going to the right counselor, I suppose, even. In a sense, that stress will create as much physical pain as a true injury.
Well, we talked about emotional baggage too. Remember last time?
Yeah. And that Huberman podcast I was telling you about, he was relaying a story from some guy at a construction site. He fell off something and a nail went through his boot. And he said it was the most excruciating pain he's ever imagined, like all the way to the hospital. Like every time he moved his foot whatsoever, it was just like insane pain. And then he got to the hospital, they removed his boot. The nail went between his toes. It didn't actually penetrate. No, it didn't actually penetrate his skin at all.
It still freaks me out.
Yeah, so like he was experiencing very real pain for something that was imagined, and like that just speaks to the neurology
that's
of it.
fascinating, right? Me and my wife have been watching this show. We're all out of shows, right? Like, isn't everybody? But we stumbled on this Hulu show, and they're doing home remodels, but the architects that they get to choose a choice of the best show are using virtual reality, to show them. And we were talking about this in the rehab world because we historically have used mirror therapy. Like you can put a mirror between your hands and actually put one hand there in a mirror and then a rubber hand on the other side and hit it with a hammer, and you'll freak out and you think your hand just got hit with a hammer.
Whoa.
So it's all in the head, right? So if we could take this virtual reality and show you that you're moving well, we'd actually solve a lot of the pain problem. I mean, it's so much of it is in our knotted up brains. It's wild.
It's fascinating.
I mean, yeah, it's amazing. And we see that in like war, like people get their arms blown off, which if that happens to you, you're going to imagine like it's traumatizing and it pass out from the pain, and they go on for like fighting a battle before they even realize it happened.
Wow.
Like the pain doesn't compute. Same thing happened physically. So this, I mean, it comes into play in rehab because the reality is if you feel knee pain, you think something's wrong, but maybe something's not wrong. Maybe you just need to retrain the brain to understand that you should be moving that way.
Yeah. Okay. Well, this is too good of a segue. We'll go out of order for the questions here, but I feel like this is the right point to bring up the dry needling, right?
Yeah.
So not only this is something that you do at your practice, but like you're so specialized in this that you actually teach clinics with this.
Correct.
Yeah. So walk us through dry needling from the beginning, because I've tried to explain it and I think I did no justice to it. So I want to hear it from somebody who actually is an expert in the subject.
Well, let's start with how we got to dry needling as American physical therapists. So they were doing, I believe in Canada, maybe a physician was doing a study on injections to like lidocaine injections and seeing how they affected different points in the body. And so his placebo, one injection had the lidocaine and he injected it, and the placebo was to stick a needle, so a dry needle meaning nothing's coming out, no medication, into those same body part. And the fascinating result was not what he expected. He was getting the same outcome by using the dry needle as which was just supposed to be the placebo. It was creating the same change in the patients that the injections were. So you follow that up, and here we are, 15 or 20 years down the road now, and we've kind of nailed it down to this art form. And what we're doing is we're taking a very thin monofilament needle, we'd call it, but for all intents and purposes, it's just a really thin steel needle. It's the same needle an acupuncturist use, which there's a lot of territorial debate there because a lot of acupuncturists have become offended that we're doing acupuncture. We are not. I don't know anything about acupuncture other than it's not what I'm doing. So we're using the same tool. And what we're doing is we're literally tracking the nervous system. So if you come in with knee pain, we'll find out what's going on, and we'll follow that nerve from your low back where it comes out down your leg, and we're able to put the needles in kind of along that pathway, also into the deep stabilizer muscles. And literally the best description is we're able to hit the reset button on your nervous system. And it truly, I mean, it becomes like a magic trick, because you can walk in with back pain and knee pain or can't move, and I can needle you and suddenly you can move again. So the proper way to use that, though, becomes to literally take the philosophy of reset, reinforce, and reload. So we use the needles to reset that nervous system, to send your brain a better message ultimately, like somehow, and I don't think we really understand how, it's truly changing the flow of the nerve. A nerve is like a hose sending electricity down, and it can get pinched, it can get damaged, it can have all kinds of different issues going on. And somehow by going in with the needles, we're able to hit that reset button, kind of reset that flow and reset that messaging. Like if things are hurting down there and we needle it, and somehow the body responds to that by saying, oh, this feels better, it's moving better. And ultimately, if we can create that change, then we can reinforce it with proper movement and then reload it by strengthening it. We'll talk more about that. But the dry needling is really this amazing tool that can create that window where you couldn't do a squat or your shoulder, like you couldn't get your shoulder overhead. So how can I get you to do a shoulder press, which is what maybe you need to do? Well, if I needle you, suddenly you can get your shoulder overhead to where we want it to move. and then we can teach you to do a proper shoulder press, and then the body adapts to moving correctly.
Yeah. It's amazing because like you think your inability to do a shoulder press is a musculature issue, like preventing you from being able to do it. But what you're saying is it's more of the central nervous system just giving you the feedback that you shouldn't be able to do it. That's amazing.
Yeah, and that's so often true. And unfortunately, I don't know if it's because, I mean, schools have lots of politics, I think is the reality, but PT school, medical school, we aren't necessarily teaching that. Like you have your orthopedic section, which is like you said, the musculoskeletal type, and then you have your neuro section. Like they're very separated things, which is absurd because we're not treating either one in isolation. So we need to try to figure out how to tie them back together, because you can't have one without the other. You can't have movement. And really, I mean, the needling is proving it, but we know, like we said, more often than not, it's not like this muscle's shortened. Not so much that you can't move. And that's the point of the example of like, if I took your head off, suddenly your shoulder would go there. But I didn't affect your pec or your shoulder or anything. I just let the nervous system let go. And suddenly you can move. And there's a time and a place where it's truly a joint issue. But those are so much more rare and so much on the extreme. They're not 90% of what we see.
Interesting.
So
is that because, like, would an orthopedic surgeon have a different take on that?
Yeah, maybe, but not if only if they're so biased to what they do that they don't want to be honest about it. Because I think they would know, but I think, I mean, it's always a challenge, I think, for an orthopedic surgeon, because their job is to do surgery. So if our medical system was set up better, you would start with me or the physical therapist, and you'd end up at the surgeon when physical therapy failed. And then maybe, because the surgeon is solving only a mechanical problem.
Right.
And if he's the first guy to treat you, then you've started with the wrong option.
Yeah.
And he's maybe created a bigger problem, because we know having surgery can solve the problem, but it's definitely creating problems down the road.
Yes.
I mean, by having knee surgery, you're going to have arthritis down the road. We could talk about arthritis too. Does that have to be a painful event? I mean, there's all these other factors that come into play, but surgery should never be the first line of defense. So I don't know if it's the surgeon's fault as much as it's our system's fault that's sending you to the surgeon to start with. And that's not his job is to do surgery.
Yeah. When you're a hammer.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah. Like, so yes, I think their job is to do the mechanical side of things. But I think if they were put in their proper place, the system would work out better.
So I remember when you did dry needling on my shoulder, I remember a intense pulsing sensation. Yeah. So what is the mechanics of the actual, like, how does the needling work aside from just sticking a needle in the nervous system?
How far in does it go?
Do you want to ask that question?
Kind of.
Yeah, so the needles, well, how far in it goes this is an interesting thing, because there's like, well, can I go get a deep tissue massage? And the reality is, one, the needle is very specific, so I can hit specific points. But we know from most of our studies that, are you really being completely accurate? Probably not. Like, if someone tells you they are, they're probably lying to you. We're getting pretty dang close. But that needle's going in, like if I needle Zach's back, it's stopping when I hit his spine. His skeleton. I'm not getting to the spinal cord, but I'm hitting bone.
Is there blood?
There's very rarely blood. If there's blood, it's like it's a drop. It's amazing. I mean, yeah, that's how I felt when I first learned about it as well. But once you try it, it's a pretty amazing outcome. So what we'll do is we'll put the needles in. And so I teach for a company, and I teach dry needling all over the U.S. and in Canada. And there's different approaches to dry needling, but I think certainly I would vote that we've got the best approach. And I think we're more and more seeing that the electrical stim is added to the needles makes the biggest impact. And so that's what I do. And what we do is we put the needle in where we want. And it could be anywhere from 2 to 10 needles. It depends on the situation. And then we attach electrical stimulation, which is just like if you ever were in an athletic training room. But we're attaching it to the needle, and where you get the most stimulation is at the tip of that needle. So now I'm at this layer, say in your spine, that really these little tiny stabilizing muscles that really the nerves run through them and they stabilize the spine. We aren't able to reach that any other way. And then I'm putting that pulsing electricity through there. And we put it at different rates and different frequencies, and that is able to create the largest reset that we see. It is fascinating, though, because, again, going back to this point of the human body being so connected, we have a study where we needled a shoulder and I think biopsied the calf and had physiological changes in the calf, meaning increased blood flow, decreased pain receptors, which is truly a physiological thing that tells your brain something hurts. So we affected the entire system by sticking one needle in the shoulder. Mm-hmm. So as a Western trained mechanical physical therapist, I follow the logical pathway of like, where's the nervous system? Where is it hurting? What muscles are dysfunctional? But ultimately with the thought in mind that like we're affecting the whole body pretty drastically.
And we were chatting about this before we hit record also, but an area that you're excited about and like something that I just kind of asked by random is obviously I think people think of dry needling to treat injuries,
right?
But it can also be used in a performance enhancing context, like in a not illegal way, or maybe not yet, but so tell us about that study that was done with high level collegiate athletes.
Yeah, so I mean this was a super fun study because it's so relatable to all of us. And so they took Division I, like top level Division I basketball players. I think they were North Carolina or Duke or something, but they were these elite level, well-trained athletes. And they did a vertical jump. So something they are expert at, not out of their realm, something they're really good at. And then they needled them and literally went back out on the floor like within 20 minutes. So they did 5-minute needling session in their calves, stuck them back out on the floor and increased that vertical jump by, I think the average was 1.5 to 2 inches, a significant amount for athletes like that. Like when you're at that level, less than 1% improvement is significant. So,
right.
So drastic change. And so we've seen the performance benefits. And in my practice, I'll never do this for someone I don't know well and haven't treated because the needling can have various effects initially. But I definitely treat athletes before, during, and after competition. So sometimes it's for recovery. It's brilliant for recovery. Oftentimes it's to get that performance boost. So a lot of my runners who know me well will come in, say the Friday afternoon before a Saturday morning ultra, and we'll needle them and it'll just give them that boost. The fear factor there is always I've given them something they're not used to. So that's why I don't do it just with a new client, because you can actually go out and hurt yourself more if you don't know what effect that has. Or like in the CrossFit gym, if someone's doing some heavy overhead movement and their shoulder's been kind of janky and I needle it and suddenly they can do everything they wanted to do, they're going to go lift more weight than they should and hurt themselves. So, but it's that amazing. Like it really boosts performance. The NFL guys, a lot of them are getting needled at like halftime, certainly every day. The Olympic Training Center unfortunately they had like one injury, which is possible. And then they outlawed it at the Olympic Training Center. So a lot of the athletes have to go outside the rule book to get needled now.
Is there something about it that would make it like against the rules to do? It doesn't sound too bad.
Not against the rules. The risk is extremely low, but there is a risk in sticking a needle into somebody. So really your possible risks are you're sticking a needle in, so you could create an infection. I've never seen that happen, but it could. And technically you can actually stick a needle into someone's lungs, which can cause a pneumo. It sounds awful, but it's such a minor, honestly, like it's such a minor impact that even if you did that, which you shouldn't if you're skilled and paying attention, but it could happen. But if you did that 99.9% of the time, you'd go get an x-ray, they'd see it, they observe you for a couple days, it heals itself. It's no big deal. It sounds like a big deal, admittedly. That's why you should go to someone who's skilled and you trust. Certainly, if they're needling your leg, the biggest impact you could have is a bruise and some muscle soreness. But if we're getting around the spine and other areas, that the lungs are there. So there's some risk, but outside of that, there's no regulations as far as it being illegal in performance or anything.
Okay.
So speaking of the CDT, it's not totally unheard of for somebody to get off the trail around like what is it called? No, what's the one off of 70 by the 214ers? I'm blanking on the name. Anyways, people coming off the CDT could get to Denver. Let's say somebody's dealing with a bad injury in the course of their Thru-Hike. They wanted to see you. Do you think dry needling has a place in the context of a Thru-Hike? And like, if this was their first time getting dry needled, are those dice worth rolling?
Yeah, I mean, in my mind, it would be worth rolling. I would have to assess the person in front of me individually, but I should, and any PT really should be able to assess well enough to say, like, what is the injury? I mean, is it back pain because you've just been overdoing it so much and your back's just beat up? And can we just hit the reset button and give you a little relief and get you moving better again and you can progress? For sure. Is it a torn Achilles or a partially torn Achilles or calf that I'm going to make you feel better, and then two more days in, you're going to completely tear it and someone's going to have to come rescue you? Those are the issues like we see. I mean, one of our instructors, this story gets told a lot when we teach classes, he had a hamstring injury and they were doing like a pickup game of softball. So he needled himself in his hamstring and he made it feel so much better that he went out that day and played the game of softball, and running the bases completely tore his hamstring. So this is the risk that you run, but like a Thru-Hiker, one, the intensity is fairly low, right? Like, I mean, maybe not quite as low for someone like you who's going a lot faster, but it's still low. You're still going for hours on end at this low. So it's a little bit easier to manage that. And as long as I assess the person in front of me, I mean, it could be a magical outcome. I mean, it's similar, right? For years, especially in the US, we've seen chiropractors have been our go-to to like, oh, I just go in and he snaps my back and I feel better. The needling is able to create that kind of like, oh, I suddenly feel better experience. I never sell it as the long-term solution, but if you're trying to finish an event, and it depends on who you are, like, is this that important to you that you're willing to risk injury but you'd rather feel better and keep pushing on and maybe you just get better and you just needed to set that nervous system a little again, then that becomes, and that's always my conversation with my athletes, like, is it worth it, or would you rather just back off? Or as a Thru-Hiker, are you just done, or is this a big enough deal to you, like, that we should take the risk? And the worst case scenario is you hurt yourself a little worse, then you've got to pull out and go through a little bit longer rehab process maybe.
Is it more effective for acute injuries where like something you're fine and then all of a sudden something hurts a lot, or chronic injuries where like my knee's been shitty for 2 years and I just want to get rid of that pain?
I guess it depends. I mean, that's one of the things we're trying hard to help in our medical system and even thought process is that if you can get in to see me with that acute injury, I can certainly get you better much faster. If that acute injury is a true muscle tear, I could make you feel better, but I can't solve that problem instantly. I can still help you heal faster, but it's not an instant solution. Whereas with chronic pain, oftentimes you've fought through it for months and so many issues and nothing's helped. You've probably tried the wrong things, but either way, your experience is nothing's helped, and we needle you and suddenly you feel better. That's probably the bigger, more impactful experience for most people, but it still works extremely well for both. I mean, I gave a lecture to a group of Colorado physical therapists on dry needling for athletes. And we talked about that because there's this big debate. Like, if my athlete sprains his ankle, you bring him in the training room, do you needle him right there? And my vote is yes, because we're going to change the whole next steps in the process, and we're going to get him moving faster. But if there's truly torn ligaments, he's still got torn ligaments. So so I would say it depends for sure. But effective for changing the experience for both.
Yeah.
How long does it last? Like, are people coming back and getting it like repeatedly done for the same spot, or how long does it usually go between sessions?
So that's a fair question. So usually, and that's why the whole reset, reinforce, reload thing becomes important, because I'd say on average, like if you come in and say you've got hamstring pain and part of it we see is like you can't touch your toes, and we needle you and suddenly you can touch your toes and the hamstring pain goes away. If you did nothing, that would probably remain in effect for 2-3 days. My point is then I've got to take that window and teach you how to deadlift or whatever the solution is. And then you come back 4 days later and we do it again until you come back and say, oh, now I can do this continually. But the needling, my goal is always to not make the needling a chronic, repetitive thing. Like, that's where I get frustrated with the old school chiropractic model. Like, it was a good business model. And I think in this day and age, there's a lot of younger chiropractors, especially practicing more in a correct way like I am. But the old school model was, well, if you just come in twice a week for the next 20 years, we'll make you feel better. They're not solving the problem, obviously. They're treating the symptoms, which in some ways is what needling can do if you use it that way. But my goal is to use it to help us solve the problem. And so I think if used properly, it becomes a really helpful tool. And so if in my practice, a typical, like, usually it's a much different model. So I'll see people 5 to 10 sessions, depending on, usually it's closer to 5, but it depends on how major of things we're dealing with. And we'll start once a week for a couple weeks to kind of create a foundation and some change and get some programming started. And then we start to spread it out to every 2 weeks, every 3 weeks, come back in a month and check in with me, because my job is to teach you what to do. I'm not going to stand there and count reps with you, and I don't want to needle you every day. Like, there's no side effect, like I could, but I'm not interested, and that's not a good solution. So I think an honest practitioner will take more of that approach. And my goal in my practice is truly to empower you to solve this problem yourself and to solve it today and to come back in 20 years and say, I just did my Thru-Hike again and that problem's not there because I kept doing what I was supposed to do.
Yeah. I can give a honest endorsement of maybe not just the dry needling, but Freeborn's PT practice altogether, because I was dealing with a shoulder injury for a year, arm wrestling. Injured to arm wrestling.
I forgot that's what happened.
And like, I just assumed it would get better on its own. Like, throughout my history, I've gotten injured and just like my body recovers. Didn't happen. I went through, we did some exercises. You gave me the dry needling, and like, legitimately I was good with the exercises. I actually followed the protocol. I know a lot of people don't always do that. And within a matter of weeks, like, now I can do things at CrossFit again, and it's amazing. It's I feel like I'm reborn in a way. So I think the dry needling conversation makes for a perfect segue to talk about a subject that I think is very fascinating, is how neurology plays a role in weightlifting as well.
Yeah.
Because this is something that I've learned only in the last year or so, is how important it is, because you're essentially training your nervous system in order to get stronger. And like, I've been watching more videos of late where they really emphasize that you're focusing like on the flex itself. And it's not necessarily to improve your form as much as it is to actually train your nervous system to actually fire the right neurons throughout the body. So can you talk a little bit about how the central nervous system plays a role in like strength training overall?
Yeah. So that I was just having this conversation at the gym today, actually, with somebody. I'm a Strong First certified kettlebell instructor, and they're a company out there who this Russian guy, Pavel, basically brought kettlebells to the U.S., and he's got this company called Strong First with very high standards. You can't take their certification without basically this 30-hour training weekend and passing all these very specific fitness tests. Otherwise, they won't let you take their name. I bring them up, though, because they're obsessed with strength, and they're obsessed with this line that strength is a skill. And that's the truth. So if you practice strength, you get stronger. And it's a really fascinating way to build strength, because it all comes back to the nervous system again. And so one example is Pavel, because if you look up a picture of him, I don't know, he's 6'1", 180 pounds maybe, like soaking wet.
He's not jacked.
He's not jacked, but he's way stronger than you or me.
Yeah.
And he's been like tested in university labs and like one of the strongest pound for pound cores they've ever tested, compared to NFL guys, strongest man guys, UFC fighters, like a stronger core, bigger deadlifts. I mean, this guy's, so, And most of that philosophy comes through, one, doing movements correctly, but again, that's because of the nervous system, because you're training the nervous system to move well. And then the other thing that I think is really relevant to that question is this thing he calls grease the groove. And it's perfect for someone who wants to say, pull-ups are always a good example because most of us can't do very many pull-ups and many of us can't do any. And so, yeah, right. So, but the thought process is, and if you can't do any, you'd have to use a little bit of an assist or a band. But he just says, put a pull-up bar in the doorway or something. And every time you go by throughout the day, you do 1 or 2 or 3 reps. Or like if, say, my max is 10 reps, I do, say, 5 reps. And that practice of the skill actually makes me stronger to where at the end of a month, I can suddenly do way more pull-ups and I'm much stronger in that movement. Mm-hmm. All we've done is train the nervous system. So contrary to the talk we'll have as we continue about really loading, and there's a time and a place for going heavy and loading as well. But if we're not doing it, if we're not moving well and correctly and training the nervous system, then we can't get that going. And it is fascinating because the nervous system, again, it creates that change. It makes you stronger. We can even think about it like whether it's as simple as coffee as a stimulant or some energy drink. If you take that before your workout and it stimulates you, you lift more, but you're not stronger. I mean, what is that energy? That's affecting the nervous system and ultimately your motivation to lift more. And so it really, it's amazing. And I love Pavel as an example because he is this skinny little guy that can outlift most of us. And he would say it's because he's trained that nervous system to do that without any goal of putting on mass.
Anyone who's interested in learning more about him, he's done a lot of really good interviews, but you've probably seen this video too on YouTube. He does like a kettlebell instruction course. I want to say it's like an hour long, but this must be an old video.
It's old school, yeah.
Yeah, and he calls everyone comrade.
Yeah, he's a true Russian, yeah.
Yeah, so if you're interested, check that out.
His Rogan interview is more recent as well and is interesting.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would agree that old school, you can really get a flavor for who Pavel is when that one.
He has a line in that interview where he says he doesn't eat chicken because he thinks it's a weak bird or something.
That's right.
I'm going to start using that.
Yeah. So I think that's a perfect segue to the conversation about the difference between hypertrophy versus strength training. So I think you kind of defined what strength training is. Like you're not actually building muscle.
Yeah. Well, that's a fascinating thing. And I think we can talk more about that as it relates to specifically Thru-Hikers and really endurance athletes as a whole. But strength training is getting you stronger. And I think we've equated that. I mean, honestly, like when you and I were growing up in high school, the weight room was like for bodybuilders, right? Yeah. Like high school athletes and then bodybuilders. And that's changed now over the years to where we're all in a weight room. But we haven't really learned the concept of strength training. And it depends on your goals. Like, I mean, if you're a 16-year-old dude, you still just want to get jacked. Like, that's cool. Yeah. But strength training is about getting stronger, where versus hypertrophy training. And if we test a bodybuilder and a strength guy side by side, the strength guy is going to be much stronger. Hypertrophy training is building big muscles, and that's a much different approach. But the funny thing is that we've defaulted to a very bodybuilder-esque approach in most of our training. So if you're an untrained individual and you go into the gym without really knowing what to do, you default to 3 sets of 10, 3 sets of 15, moderate weight kind of, and then you do a set to failure or you jump on the machine and that seems to make sense because you don't want to build muscle. But the misconception and kind of ironic thing at this point is you're doing bodybuilding training, you're doing hypertrophy training, you're not actually getting yourself that much. I mean, if you're a newbie, you're going to get stronger no matter what, but you're not truly building strength. You're really building size. And if that's your goal, cool. But if you're wanting to train to be a Thru-Hiker or an Ironman or something along those lines, the last thing you want to do is put on pounds. Mm-hmm. You just want to create power. Mm-hmm. And that's where reps and sets and rest and load all come into play. But those are your kind of two primary like weight room thought processes of either hypertrophy training or straight strength training. And then, I mean, you add in today CrossFit / functional fitness, which people, again, seem to think CrossFit's a good strength tool. It's a good strength tool if you're not a strong lifter already, but ultimately it's much more of a bodybuilder approach. That's why all these CrossFitters look jacked. But if you compare even the elite CrossFitters with strength guys, they can't lift any weight compared to strength guys. I mean, they're super impressive. But from a true and Matt Fraser, you know, the best CrossFitter around, was an Olympic lifter beforehand, and he would say the same thing. I mean, it's a much more cardiovascular bodybuilding type thing.
Yeah, it's like its own sport.
It's its own sport now. Yeah. So it's trying to mix the two, but functional fitness has become such a big fad thing, and so we think that's solving bigger problems, but it depends on what your problem is.
Yeah. So I definitely want to talk about how strength training plays into Thru-Hike preparation.
Yeah.
But before we do that, quickly, I'm curious to get your take on, do the nutritional requirements differ in strength training versus hypertrophy?
Yeah, for sure. So I think nutrition's always tricky, and it's certainly, as much as it has to be part of my understanding, it's not my total expertise, but I'm certainly obsessed with it because we can't heal pain, build muscle, build strength, go on long hikes, any of that without good nutrition. The standard, I think, no matter what you're doing, if you're an active individual, we're coming to more and more of the conclusion that if you can get somewhere close to that 0.7 to 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight, then we're going to solve a lot of problems irregardless. But with strength training, you don't want to overeat, so to speak. With bodybuilding, you need to slam a lot of calories. I mean, it's just the reality. Like, if you want to put on muscle mass, the more calories, the better. And truly, and so if you are wanting to be one of these world's strongest man, doesn't matter what your body weight is too. If you're going to be 400 pounds in strength train, that's different too. Those guys are eating 10,000 calories a day or something crazy. But for most of us who want to just get stronger, there's not a necessity to consume calories unless you want to bodybuild. Then to build that mass, you've got to, any massing program will ask you to put on 3,000, 4,000 calories. It's the most effective way to put on muscle mass.
That's a lot of food.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Even eating a gram per pound of body weight, I feel like is a chore. You have to have
certainly.
Protein powder to get to that, because eating that much chicken or egg whites or whatever it might be is you don't even enjoy the food. It's so bland. Okay, so I don't want to bury the lead. Obviously, I think it's super important to touch on this because I don't think this is something that's discussed very much in the thru-hiking world, is the importance of strength training for preparing for any endurance sport, but let's keep it specific to thru-hiking. So if you were sitting down with somebody who's preparing for a thru-hike in 2 or 3 months or whatever it might be, what would your protocol be for them?
Yeah, and so this is this is where our conversation and interest in this whole concept kind of started. It's a fascinating conversation that leads back to this misconception of what to do in the weight room. So my typical thru-hiker, I'm treating a couple right now, but typical person in that world comes in and says either they're not going in the weight room at all, which is probably the most often truth.
Yeah.
If they've decided they should be strength training, they're going in and they're doing that 3 sets of 15. I'm trying not to put on mass. I know I need to do some cross training type protocol. So it's always about the discussion in front of you. But the reality is the solution is quite simple and is really true for every thru-hiker, because you are in an endurance sport. And the only way to be the most successful at that endurance sport, but when you're using the weight room to help, is to do true strength training. And that includes keeping the reps low enough that you're getting stronger and you're not putting on weight. So we don't want that hypertrophy. And now if you're the guy that still wants to put on 10 pounds of muscle, it's a different conversation. But if you're the one that wants to be the most successful at thru-hiking, then you need to be as lean and really small as possible. The smaller, the better, right? If you're freakishly strong and weigh 120 pounds, you're going to kill it. So then the programming becomes the biggest thing about the program becomes the reps and sets and the rest periods. And so if we want to play in that strength realm, we've got to stay at 5 reps or less. And so that's huge. As soon as you hit 6 or more, you're building size, or you're playing in this gray area. You're not you're not targeting true strength.
So sorry, is it
Yep.
supposed to be like really hard? Like by the 6th one, I can't do it.
So right. So that's the next part. So you've got to do 5 reps or less. And so a classic number is, say we're going to do a set of 5. The easiest way to lay that out, you could say like it's got to be above 80% of your max, but that's not helpful because you don't know what to do with that. What you want to do is have 2 at the most 3 reps in reserve. So with my client, if we're going to give you deadlifts, say, we're going to find that weight that you do 5 reps with, and you could do 7, maybe 8. You could not do 9 or 10. If you can do 9 or 10, and I mean 100% max effort, it's too light. Most of us, especially in the hiking community, I find don't want to play in that world because that's one, it's scary if you've never lifted that heavy, and you're concerned about injuries, so you don't want to push yourself that hard. But if you're not lifting that heavy, you're not actually building strength. So that's got to be the primary. I mean, the simplest way to break it down is to do this classic strength routine is 5 sets, 5 reps at that weight. So you get a nice warm up, you pick an exercise, and you do with a 7 rep max, we would call it. So 2 reps in reserve. And so if I can say squat 225 pounds for 7 reps, then I do that for 5 reps. I take at least a 2-minute break. So this is the other difficult part, especially if you've got type A type people, because that 2-minute break means you sit down and like play on Instagram or something. It doesn't mean you do abs or you do curls or
no supersets.
No supersets. So right, the classic anytime you do any of that other stuff, now you're adding this endurance world. So you're just overtraining the system that you're used to training anyways. We want to train a different system. So it's got to be 2-minute breaks, and it could be 5-minute breaks. I mean, it doesn't matter how long the break is, as long as it's not less than 2 minutes. And then you do it again. And really a routine, we find the best benefits in that 20 to 25 rep range. So this 5 sets of 5 reps is a super simple way to get started. You can Google it even, and there's lots of programming of just this 5x5 model. And then you pick the core exercises. So if you come in and see me and say, I'm going to do this Thru-Hike, we're going to have you deadlifting, back squatting. Those are going to be your primaries. I'm also probably going to get you doing some sort of pull, whether that's pull-ups, maybe weighted pull-ups if you're a little bit stronger, or maybe assisted pull-ups, and a press. So where some sort of shoulder press straight up overhead. These are building not only full body strength, but core strength as well. And core, I mean, the hips and the abs create your core, and that's what's going to help you last over the long haul. And it's fascinating because we can see that the effect of being strong actually plays a role on day 30. Whereas if you're doing 3 sets of 15, all you're doing is adding to your hiking training and wearing your body out more. So you're taking away from your training. You're adding fatigue. You're not assisting yourself. But being strong will last to the end, whether you're through hiking or the closest example with my everyday athletes that I see are these everyday athletes in Colorado, at least these 100-mile ultra runners. Yeah, I mean, but right, like I had a patient this morning, and she's gonna make the 40-hour cutoff for a 100-mile race. That's her goal. So it's 40 hours of straight running or moving. Jesus. And we've figured out, and she's bought in at this point, that the only way to make her get to that 30-hour mark and not be falling apart is to be lifting really heavy. And the cool thing is, if you're training to Thru-Hike, you can do this routine 2 or max 3 days a week, and it shouldn't affect your training. You can go out and do all your endurance training you want because you're playing with a different system. And you're actually impacting a totally different system that's going to help you instead of hurt you, and it's not going to make you feel worn out. So the weight room is suddenly a help instead of a deterrent to what you're doing.
So is this just for things like deadlifting, or can this apply to anything that I have at home that I can work out with? Because I'm thinking about the things at my house, which is mainly just like a 30-pound weighted vest that I put on to really make myself miserable, but I could probably do 5 sit-ups or 5 push-ups with it and then really just feel pain. Is that like the
Feel
same
pain.
idea that we're going for?
That's a fair question. I mean it's a COVID fair question, especially because the gym's closed and then you couldn't buy equipment. So
And I'm afraid of that.
if you came in my office, then I would, and you weren't going to join a gym. My first thing is you've got to join a gym or you've got to buy weights, honestly. Now, right now, you literally can't buy weights, although some are coming back in stock. But if this is your reality, like you're not joining the gym, you've got a 30-pound weight vest, how can we make it work? Now we've got to play with some fancier programming because you're not able to load heavy enough. Like you can squat more than 10 reps with a 30-pound weight vest on, right? Maybe you can. Depends on form. There's other factors. But what we can do is we can make you do a single leg squat or a single leg deadlift. Or we can add in this plyometric type thought process where we're jumping and creating this explosion. So we can make it work. It's less ideal. I mean, the ideal scenario is to heavily load. The other magic trick, and again, I didn't come on here to promote Strong First and Pavel, but kettlebells are brilliant and this is where I solve the problem with many of my clients, because I've got a lot of clients that are just not interested in the weight room. And my first goal is you go in and you find a heavy barbell and you lift heavy weights. It really is. And Strong First would concur. Like if you want to get truly strong, the barbell is just, you can lift so much more weight. But you can go, we've even in Colorado, we've got a local manufacturer of kettlebells, Rep Fitness, but you can buy 3 or 4 kettlebells, and things like a kettlebell swing can overload the system without you having a super heavy kettlebell by nature of their on-off kind of system when you're swinging and it pulls. I mean, it just changes how it loads, and it almost creates this magical, in Strong First, we call it the what the heck effect. Because you can be like, say you're a 400-pound deadlifter and you swing a 53-pound kettlebell for a month and you don't deadlift at all. And then you go back and you'll deadlift more than you were deadlifting before. Mm-hmm. So the cool solution is, and usually the feasible, for a couple $100, you can stock your pickup truck, your living room, whatever, with 3 or 4 kettlebells and solve. So that's but the weight vest works if that's truly all you have, but it creates a bigger challenge.
I've also got I keep getting a little sore throat. I also have like 2 10-pound, I don't know what you call them. They're the one-hand weights.
Like a dumbbell.
yeah, those.
Yeah.
I've got 2 of the 10-pound ones and I've got 2 of the 20-pound ones. But like I'm just like the whole barbell, like that's very scary to me.
It's scary, right? So yeah, and I think that's where finding honestly, it could be a good trainer or a good physical therapist who's doing performance stuff. And oftentimes, like someone like you walks in my office and that's exactly your story. Like, yeah, this is a bad idea. But usually it works better for me if you've already been to 5 other people, because you're like, well, I'll let this guy try this. And so that's where having somebody, though, with that skill set comes into play, because then if you spend a few hours with me and I'm teaching you how to do it properly and I'm guiding you through your first couple times of lifting those heavier weights and you're like, that feels good and I'm not getting hurt, then suddenly you can gain the confidence to do it on your own. My goal is never I don't like the idea of, I've got some clients that I train all winter long because they're just obsessed with having someone guiding their process. To me, that's not my ideal world. I want to teach you how to do it and give you the confidence so you can go do it. But yeah, and I think that's part of the problem is that fear factor. Like if I tell you need a deadlift 150 pounds, like that sounds scary, right?
I think it's more just like being in public in a gym and trying to lift one of those things. Like not even like I'm afraid I'm going to hurt myself or anything like that. I just don't want anyone to see me do it.
Yeah. So, I mean, my best solution, if that's truly the reality, and here's the other thing, right? Like we want to solve your problem so that it gets solved, not convince you to go to a gym once and then you don't go. Because then in a year when I see you, you're going to be like, yeah, I quit. So my best solution would be to get kettlebells and to create a kettlebell program. Again, the vest works, but it's just 30 pounds and you're 20. Even if you have no experience strength training, like those are quickly just not enough to really load you.
So are kettlebells that different from dumbbells?
They are. You can make it up a little bit with a dumbbell, but the things that you can do with a kettlebell, specifically a swing, which you can't do well with a dumbbell, it really creates this, I mean, it does create this on-off tension that really makes the whole body stronger in a way that, I mean, you can turn a dumbbell sideways and swing it, and I mean, you can make it work if you have to, but a kettlebell is a way more efficient tool for doing things like that. And it jerks you around. I mean, because the weight isn't in your hand and it's out here, like if you do an overhead movement, like a snatch from the ground to here, there's way more required in that movement so a 20-pound dumbbell is going to be much easier than a 20-pound kettlebell swinging around. And your body has to create this full tension experience to control that movement, which makes you stronger. So
if you're on an island and you can only bring one kettlebell with you, what weight are you grabbing?
I mean, it's going to be the 24 kilos, so 53 pounds, which is interesting because and this is an interesting thought process that the method we use, like in the strong first, there's a lot of ways to swing kettlebells and to do it, but the thought process is our goal is to get people stronger if we're following that methodology, which that's why I went and got certified. It doesn't help me as a physical therapist per se, but I love their stuff, and the thought process I have usually is to get people stronger as well. And the thought becomes not how efficiently can we swing this kettlebell, but how hard can we swing this kettlebell to make this a better workout? So I can swing a 24 all day long. I mean, I've got a 106-pound kettlebell in my rehab room that I can swing. But if I swing that 24 kilo with more power, I can get this full workout I want. And I can also do sets of Turkish get-ups, and I can do presses, and it's a much more multifaceted, it's just really usable. And the better you get at, this kettlebell swing's the most easy, like, exercise to think of with kettlebells. The better you get at it, the harder you can make it and the better workout you can get. So if your skill level goes up, you just swing harder.
How long are you supposed to swing for?
Well, yeah, so now you're getting into a whole nother rep scheme.
Am I leaving the topic very far?
I mean, not in some ways, no, though, because a lot of your thru-hikers and listeners may say, well, I'd rather go buy kettlebells. And so if you really want to, you could talk to someone who's trained in kettlebells and they can create programming for you. There's a super simple solution, which is to get Pavel's Simple and Sinister program, which is just swings and get-ups, 2 exercises that will get you stronger than you've ever been if you just follow the program. If you're working with me and we're doing swings, I'm likely going to build you up to doing 10 swings on the minute for 10 minutes. So you start the clock, you do 10 swings. It should take you about 20 seconds. And this is once we've got your skill set down pretty well. You rest the next 40 seconds, and then when minute 2 starts, you go again. And we build up to that 100-ish rep range. The fascinating part about kettlebells, too, with that swing workout is you can actually, like, if you're a thru-hiker and you're injured, but you can do a swing, but you can't go hike and train your endurance, you can do like a low, medium, and high day. So you can do a 10-minute day, 30-minute day of swings, and then a 15-minute day on Friday, say, and actually keep all your endurance. Like, you can build endurance and strength. So the kettlebells are a whole, like, they're another voodoo place to play. I mean, the barbell's a simpler solution, but the kettlebells are amazing for some of this too.
It took everything in my willpower to not say imam when you
right. So
So one thing I want to emphasize that you already said is don't just buy a kettlebell and start swinging. My sister did that and then ended up with back surgery.
That's what I want to do.
Yeah, so definitely like take a course, go see someone like Freeborn, because like you can really fuck yourself up. It seems easy, but like if your form's not there, it can fuck you up real bad.
And that's a tough one. I mean, again, I'm not here to promote Strong First, but they do have a really good network of instructors, and their requirements are extremely high. So you can go to their website, put in your address, and find the nearest instructor, and at least go get a couple lessons. I would highly recommend, or even watch their YouTube videos. I've seen lots of personal trainers doing terrible swings as well. So if you find someone you trust, I mean, there's personal trainers at all skill levels do it, but I would concur that learning how to use a kettlebell is it's worth the investment in the rest of your life versus back surgery.
And and their methodology is, I think, a little bit different than like what you see in a CrossFit gym or like most people at a gym in general. Is like it's a shorter, truncated, like you're really focusing on like squeezing your
power.
Yeah.
I mean, they're all strong first is literally their philosophy. They're trying to create power and strength. It's not about these giant movements that are, I mean, you're unlikely to see injured strong first people. Because they're obsessed with doing things correctly and just creating power.
I want to go back to something. So you mentioned with the strength training protocol that you recommend that you advise people to go at 80%. But you also said earlier that like if you want to train your central nervous system to get stronger, like throughout the day is just practice. Like you could do something in like the 30 to 50% range. So why is 80% the ideal number as opposed to 50?
Yeah. So, and that's, I mean, this is where it's become this tricky thing to figure out your complete optimal training. And that's why I default to like, if you don't know what you're doing and you just want to get stronger and you're not going to get a ton of help, this 5x5, do that because that's going to get you stronger. When we start playing with the nervous system and greasing the groove, you can add extra to it. But if you always like take squats, if you always do squats in that greasing the groove 30 to 50% range, you're going to prime the nervous system. You're going to help. You're going to improve from where you are today, but you're not going to build the true strength that we need. So it's a combo. And that's why it's a really nice tool for something like a pull-up, because a pull-up by nature is hard enough that you are getting some good challenge there anyways. But it's about learning to move well and training the system. And by doing that, you're definitely going to improve where you are today. And if you've got a 30-pound weight vest, you add that, you're going to improve a little bit more. But you can't build that true strength. And this comes into play as well with aging. And it depends, but from sometime in our 20s, basically, we all start losing that strength. We're not losing endurance, and we see that. I'm sure you see it in the Thru-Hiking world. I'm less familiar with the age there, but I see it in all kinds of, whether it's adventure races or Ironmans or all kinds of endurance events. You've got 40-year-olds, you've got 50-year-olds crushing times because we're able to maintain that endurance. But what we start to see is injuries come into play as we age. And it does. It starts at sometime in our 20s. We're losing that strength. So if we can train ourselves in such a way that we build that strength, then we can build up what we're losing and keep it for longer, and we can perform at a much higher level for a much longer period of time.
That actually segues perfectly to my next question. Before I get there, are you guys hearing the same?
Yeah. Oh my God, the headphone motions are going wild today.
Let's try adjusting. Can you change the direction of the mic?
It's just like it doesn't end up on the recording. I've been on airplane mode.
Is there something on my phone?
So we don't know what it is, honestly. Like this happens almost every single time. Like maybe if you just move the phone to the side. Yep.
It's like a weird radio station that the headphones pick up. It's the strangest thing. There was jazz before. Did you hear it?
Yeah.
There was like a...
No, it's still there. Okay. If you guys want to go without the headphones, that's going to be less distracting for you. I don't know what this is. This happens almost every single time.
I was wondering.
I saw your face during one part of it, and I was like, he hears him too.
Yeah, like the DJ in the background.
Yeah. I'm going to keep it on just so I can make sure that the audio levels are good.
I feel like, as long as... Yeah, because I can hear you guys fine,
okay,
so
perfect.
I'm fine with that. That might be easier.
So I want to go to something foundational because obviously we touched on the importance of strength training, but I don't know if we really hammered home why strength training is important for endurance sports, because I think like historically you think just cardiovascular system, that's what you want to train.
Yeah.
And just like the repetitive motion of like the sport specific thing, training muscles that way. Why is doing deadlifts going to be helpful for somebody on a Thru-Hike?
Yeah, I mean, that's crazy. And I would say to make that make sense, we've got to think about the nervous system, because what we see is being stronger, training that strength system prevents breakdown at whether it's day 30 or 40 or the end of a 12-hour day. Somehow it allows, one, we know for sure, the obvious is the mechanical issue. If you're stronger when you're tired, your body still supports itself better, so you move better. So one of the main things you're going to get injured with if you're through hiking is just plain old overuse injury. But really overuse, or is it overuse fatigue and then you start moving differently and compensating a little, and now the hips turned out and the ankles overdoing it, and like all these compensation patterns come into play. So if we can avoid those compensation patterns, then we can avoid a lot of those injuries. And the way we do that is by a stronger body will maintain. And it's, like I said, it also changes your training experience, because with the classic training style, if you go out and do your hiking and endurance training, and then you go to the weight room and you do your 3 sets of 15 or 3 sets of 20, you're stacking more endurance training onto that. You're already wearing yourself out. You're literally starting your hike already beat up, even if you're not feeling it yet. Your body's already worn down. You're wearing it down, wearing it down, wearing it down. And if we add in that strength training, we're actually not wearing the system down. We're freshening it up. We're kind of boosting the system, and we're allowing it to tolerate more. And so that's the impact it's able to have and to start preventing injuries.
Great explanation. Thank you. Actually was curious myself.
Yeah.
I feel like I should know that, but I didn't.
Say segue again.
Yeah, no, segue. That's the word of the day.
I like it.
No, actually, I was going to say, I did not mean to get hung up on this part of the questions. Like, we're already over an hour in, and there's so much more that I want to get to. So we're going to move on. We're going to do the opposite of this segue. Let's talk about stretching.
Yeah.
So I'm sure everybody has heard how important stretching is, and then you talk to someone selling something else saying that stretching is totally useless. You don't see animals in nature stretching, even though my dog stretches.
You don't see a lion stretching before it takes down a gazelle.
There you go. Dog does stretch a lot.
So what is the truth with stretching? What role does it play in the importance of like endurance sports, especially?
Very little. It truly... honestly, more often than not, it's a detrimental role. And I see this, so like most of us are tight by nature. I don't know why. It seems like most humans walk in my office are tight. I'm always alarmed
Hunched
when
over
they're
a computer.
Yeah, right. And maybe it's society, whatever the case may be. It's almost alarming when you see somebody who's like really flexible and movable, unless they come in and like, I'm a yogi. Like, that makes sense. But that ability to move more, in the end, what it does is it asks you to control more movement. So you've created a problem you didn't need by becoming hyper flexible. So if you could use, the funny thing is stretching is really hard to make much change with anyways. So most of us stretch and don't make any change, so whatever, you're just wasting your time. Unless you have certain injuries, oftentimes stretching can kind of aggravate it. But if you are able to make change, or if you love yoga, and I have no problem with yoga, but if you do love yoga and you don't love strength training, you're likely to become so flexible that you've got all this motion to control that you don't have the strength to control, and now you just create bigger windows for injury. And so very rarely is true flexibility the cause. Like if you come in with a knee injury, it's pretty rare that I would assess you and say, oh, this happened because your quad isn't flexible enough. Now there's some reality. We need some basic functional movement. Like if your hip doesn't extend well enough and you're hiking for miles on end, you're going to start beating up your back or your knee. So there's some basic functional mobility needed. But then we come back to that nervous system talk, because I don't think we're seeing any fair argument in the science that says that's a muscle length thing, which is what stretching solves. It's a movement thing and a nervous system thing protecting you. So if I give you stretching, I call it mobility, and it's active and it's moving and it's never holding. The only way to change a muscle length is to hold it at a really hard stretch for a really long period of time. And even that, like, you've got to convince the nervous system to let go and not fight, which is easier said than done. Yoga is probably one of the most obvious examples where people practice for years on end and create all kinds of amazing flexibility. And if you're a high level yogi, then you can control that. But if most of us get that flexible, then we've just got injuries waiting to happen, whether we're hiking or squatting or whatever the case may be. So I'd say, I mean, I don't know that I've given anybody a true like muscular stretch since I've owned my practice. Certainly there's a time and a place for creating some more mobility, but that kind of grease the groove concept. Like the hip doesn't want to go back. Let's day after day convince the nervous system that this is okay and a safe thing to do. And millimeter by millimeter, we get a little bit more, but it's not a matter of like getting in this couch stretch up against the wall and holding our hip back where it hurts for as long as we can and then saying, that's better. Like, not likely to cause any good outcomes there.
Interesting. So then obviously nestled underneath that question, I didn't use segue, nobody gets to drink.
Well, you just said it there.
Yeah.
So.
Obviously the foam roller conversation and the cross balls and
Yeah.
all that stuff. Where does that play a role? Is it equally as useless?
Yes. I mean, we've got good studies to show that it's almost laughable because you've got brilliant rehab people and trainers who are promoting these things and you'd think they know better. Maybe they do. Maybe it's just a business move or maybe they truly believe it, but they're not creating change that's solving the problem. So if you come into my office and you foam roll and you ask me about your foam roller, my response is, one, it's not solving the problem. So if it's something you're doing because you think you need to do it to make yourself better, then throw it away. If it's a nice way to relax in front of the TV and you feel better at night, then fine. Like it's not hurting anything unless you do it too hard, which most of us are. I mean, if you roll and catch your breath when you're doing it, like you're just hurting yourself. Like you could just take a hammer and hit yourself if you want to. I mean, like it's the same response.
Yeah.
The body's just going to fight you and almost tighten up more and not allow movement.
It does feel good to foam roll the lower back.
Right, totally.
Yeah.
So if it
Like a back
does
massage.
and you like it, it's literally the same kind of impact, then cool. But you're not really changing function. You're not affecting tissue in any meaningful manner. Same thing with a lacrosse ball, truly. Like we all probably love to go get a massage, right? And it feels great. And there increases maybe a little bit of blood flow in the moment, but truly like, in general, that's kind of a spa type experience. Like it feels good. And so there's nothing wrong with that. And the lacrosse ball does the same kind of thing, but is it going to heal an injury? Not really. Like there's nothing to support that it would.
Yeah. So I guess that's my next question is I've talked to people who swear by the lacrosse ball or the foam roller. Is it possible there's just like one-offs where like there's something very particular to their physiology where it is actually helping, or is that placebo effect?
Well, yeah, I mean, probably both. I mean, it's affecting the nervous system. So because you're putting input into the nervous system. So, I mean, by touching your finger, you're putting in input into the nervous system. Or a good example is if you bang your elbow, your funny bone, that hurts, right? But what's your first response? To rub it. Well, that's almost silly if you think about it, because aren't you just impacting the injury more? But it feels better when you do that. So all you're doing is sending a different message to the nervous system. So if the lacrosse ball sends a new message to your nervous system that feels good, then it's helping in some way. And if it's a placebo, but you feel better, then, I mean, the placebo is working. So we call it a placebo, but it doesn't matter. I mean, it's affecting your experience, and that's all we're trying to change, unless you truly have, if you've got a torn muscle, then we need to let it heal. But if you've just got pain and we're not seeing a huge injury, which often with your endurance crowd, with like a thru-hiker crowd, like that's more often than not the reality is like chronic overuse, beat the crap out of yourself, hurting. You just want to feel better. And it's not, I mean, there's training tools that can solve this long term, because if you keep going that direction without solving it, you're going to create arthritis and all these other wear down kind of things. But ultimately, if we can just change the message to the body, sometimes we can solve a lot of the problems.
Man, there's like, I feel like we could go 4 hours deep on this. So I'm just trying to like pick and choose the directions that I'm going. Do you have any follow-ups on that?
No, I just sat back because I figure you have so much that you want to get into that I don't want to take us off on a tangent again.
No. Because like this is a subject that I'm interested in. I obviously know like 0.5% of.
Tangents
not even that
are
much.
good though, because if you have the question, other people do.
Exactly.
Right?
That's the point that I'm trying to get at. Is like I probably go too deep down the rabbit hole. I'd like to get more of.
Well, the stretching thing's interesting. I've never heard the fact that it might not be as effective as you think thing before. But then I also laugh because the placebo effect is kind of what you said dry needling started off as, right?
Yeah, completely. Yeah.
So I guess it does work for some things.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we've got all these listener questions. Should we get to some of that?
Yeah. I guess I want to restate what you're saying. So stretching will improve flexibility, but flexibility doesn't necessarily help injury prevention.
Correct.
Yeah.
And we're seeing this so if we really wanted to really know, we're seeing this in every sports arena. So hiking, I mean, we're talking about hiking here, requires very minimal overall motion. You're not gymnasts or even CrossFitters that are doing some of these crazy overhead and gymnastics type movements. Then you need a certain amount of motion to be capable of these things. But to be able to walk well, even up and down mountains, the minimal amount of motion you need is what you want. If you have more than that, you've now got to control more than that. So you're just making life harder. But if you think so we need ankle mobility and good hip extension. Like those are two things most of us lack. So talk about an area to work on mobilizing in some way. Honestly, my favorite way would be, like I said, active mobility drills that are working on the nervous system and then loading it. Like a heavy squat will create ankle mobility better than anything else you're doing.
So can you define the difference between mobility and flexibility? Because I guess that's something that I'm not even super
clear on.
And
I mean, now you're like, that's semantics, but I think it's important because true flexibility, I think, is talking about muscle length again. So like, if my bicep was too short, I couldn't straighten my arm out. Like that would be a flexibility issue. Like it should be able to straighten out. But if it's a mobility thing, it's more likely nervous system / it could be a joint issue. Like there are times where the joint has some dysfunction where it's locking down and there's buildup and stuff that's creating the joint to not have the ability to move. That's less common as well. I mean, more often than not, if you get pain, so any injury that you have, your body's response is to protect that site. So the nervous system locks things down. So the muscles in pain actually get sort of unplugged because they get weaker because the nervous system like, well, we're not going to use those. And then things surrounding that kind of tighten up. So now you appear to be immobile or tight. But again, it's like, well, we've got to trick the nervous system into letting go and letting you move again. It's not that a flexibility issue where your bicep is actually shortened. Because muscles are fairly pliable. And I mean, really, a muscle length thing it's just not that common. And that's what you're trying to address when you're stretching. Like you're talking about muscle length. And that, I mean, it's just not usually the issue.
So shy of dry needling, a lot of the tension that's happening, is this going to be resolved with just various workouts?
Yeah. So two things. Really, the best is various workouts. Like if you can do the right kind of workouts and load them, and as long as you're not insulting your body, as long as you're not just sucking it up and saying, well, that hurts a lot, but I'm going to get through it. Because if you do that, your body's going to go right back to being tightened up afterwards. But if you're moving well, and you're thinking about getting into the right positions and you're loading those positions, your body's going to find ways to actually take on that motion and get that motion back. And so that's why I say, like, ankles. I mean, ankle's a big thing. Like, you want to go hike up and down mountains, you will benefit from having more ankle mobility, and it'll save a lot of things upstream. But if you really want the best way to get better ankle mobility, I would say it's to load a back squat and squat low enough that your ankles have to move under that load, and then practice that movement, and you're going to start changing that mobility.
Yeah.
If you sit there and do a calf stretch every day, I doubt if you're going to see a measurable change.
So somebody listening to this, I hope someone in the Golden area is checking out your facility, but obviously, the majority of our listeners are not in Golden.
Yeah.
What would someone look for to find either a good physical therapist or a good personal trainer? Like, are there certain criteria, certain certifications? Like, what should someone be looking for to get the proper training to ensure that they're doing these things the right way?
Yeah, I think it's challenging. I mean, that's a frustrating thing to think about, like being somewhere else. And if I was going to go try to find a good physical therapist, what would I look for? I think the reality is we're seeing this, and it feels specific, but it shouldn't be that specific. If they don't have a gym type setup where there's actual weights, if you go look at a facility and they've got a bunch of bands hanging on the wall and people lying on tables and a bunch of that kind of atmosphere, in my mind, they're behind the curve of where we should be today. And they're just not keeping up with what the evidence is clear. And that, unfortunately, you're going to run into that with physical therapists because we're trained to treat injuries, and somehow you get this fear factor in PT school that we can't go heavy. But all the science, even that you're learning in PT school, tells us you've got to load tissue to heal it. Mm-hmm. And then we go and we give you the screen TheraBand to do 600 reps with for the rest of your life, and a 60-page handout. Say, go do it. I think we had that conversation. You had with your ACL surgery, and you came out of it fine. But like most people with those handout with 20 exercises on them aren't going to do well. So I think, thankfully there are more and more practices like mine today, usually with younger people, but I think you're going to benefit. And this is true whether you're a 20-year-old or a 60-year-old or an 80-year-old. If you're wanting to be an active, healthy individual, you've got to go look for that. Mm-hmm. The personal trainer is hard because unless you go and kind of talk to them and kind of see where their knowledge base is and then almost give them a trial, I don't know how you can differentiate. When I managed the gym, I had 25 personal trainers working under me. The reality is there's no standardization in personal training. So any one of us can take a weekend online certificate program and call ourselves a personal trainer, and any gym can legally hire us at that point. So, there are some companies you could find a Strong First personal trainer. There's a great option. Or you can go to 24-hour fitness, but you've got to just kind of ask some questions. Even ask them if they can tell you what kind of training would you like to do with me. I'm a thru-hiker. I want to be more successful and prevent injuries this year. And if they don't come up with the idea that we need to lift heavy, we need to make you stronger, we need to stay in the low rep range, you're an endurance athlete. If they can't come to that conclusion when you're talking to them, then they just don't understand you. And that's fine. Maybe they're helpful for somebody else, but those should be obvious answers. Somebody should know those answers. Otherwise, why give them your money and learn from them? Yeah.
To your point of how things have changed, so I've had 2 ACL surgeries, 2003 and 2018. So 15-year separation. In the 2003 surgery, immediately after I was put in this machine that would straighten and bend my leg, even while I was sleeping, I had to sit in this thing to help give me mobility. Go to the next surgery, and my doctor laughed at that. He's like, that does nothing.
Does nothing.
Yeah, if anything, it's counterproductive. 2003 physical therapy, one of the things that they would do, and maybe this is helpful, I don't know, I might have just had bad PT, not you, the other one through Kaiser, not very good health insurance. But back in the day, they would stretch you to the point where you're tearing up. They would stretch you to your actual capacity. Did none of that in the last PT round. Is that advisable?
Not likely. There is a time and a place, but right. You did nothing and you have full function and came out better, right? You've got to work with the body. We've got this idea somehow in the past, especially of fighting the body, we can beat the body, but that experience, unless we have to go there, all you're doing is telling the nervous system this hurts, and the nervous system screw you. I just won't go there. And do you ever win that battle? Not really.
It made me not want to go to physical therapy.
I bet
it was
did.
So intense. It was so intense. And I should say that in my most recent surgery, I recovered twice as fast as the first time around. So it's just it was way easier, and the recovery was so much more seamless. So like I said, we could go through our questions for the next hour and a half, but you have a baby at home, as do I. So I do want to do a few listener questions, if that's okay.
Let's do it.
Cool. This one is from Joseph Foti, and he asks, how can you tell the difference between an injury you need to rest and a sore muscle you can push through?
Yeah, that's a good question. Really that becomes a bit challenging without getting a professional assessment. But if there's acute pain, if you hurt yourself, you roll your ankle, and then you can't walk on it or something like along those lines, then you need to go get someone to assess it. I mean, it's fascinating though, because many injuries, honestly, again, keeping up with evidence today, movement is the best solution. Now, if you're out on the trail on a Thru-Hike, hiking for the next 12 hours might not be the best solution. But at the same time, we see that with people that roll their ankle and keep going and it heals. That's because movement will help heal it. So separating those two is pretty tricky. But if you're getting sharp or shooty pain over a couple day period consistently, then you've got an injury. And your best case scenario, if you're in the right circumstances, is to get someone to assess it. The response may still be, well, if you want to push through, you can. Or it may be it's time to back it off. But I think that is where a doctorate level of training. I mean, I had 20 years as a strength and conditioning coach and personal trainer. And then the last, I don't know, it's 6 or 7 years now as a doctor of physical therapy. It's interesting that much of my day looks similar, personal trainer versus physical therapist, but my assessment skills as a doctor are much different. So that's where a highly skilled person with that training is able to determine it. And I think it's tough to determine that on your own. Yeah, I don't know if that helps, but it's a tricky question. I mean, there is a reality in this day and age, and even my practice, like, you can schedule a free video consult with someone like me, and many practices will do that now.
Oh, you're doing video
and
consults.
I can answer that question specifically to you. I mean, it's a free 20-minute, a few questions and a few like little assessments, and I can say like, yeah, we need to get you more help, whether it's virtual or in person, wherever you are, or you're good. Just work through it. If you're that kind of person, you're willing to do it and move on, and you'll heal and get better.
Barbara.Douglas, Barbara.Douglas 381 says how to best loosen hip flexors to reduce lower back pain.
Yeah.
I guess specific. Two-parter. Is that like even what you would do for that?
Yeah, actually that's a good, that's interesting that Barbara, right, put those two together. That's a very true statement, actually. Tight hip flexors or lack of hip extension, often leads to low back pain, because if you're not getting hip extension, you're either sending forces that the hip moving should alleviate. You're sending them into the low back or into the knee. So yes, you should be working on hip mobility, especially hip extension. Interestingly enough, I'd say more often than not, tight hip flexors, and this is a whole nother rabbit trail, but are more likely caused by weak glutes. So a weak butt, so the opposing muscle, if you're not strong enough in your butt muscles that should be pulling you into hip extension and supporting you, then your body's response in protection mode is to tighten up the front side. So my first solution would be to do like deadlifts or some sort of
kettlebells.
Kettlebell swings are great. Deadlifts are great. If you don't have those things, like if you're truly on your own, something like a box jump even is a good way to start building some power there and opening the hips up. Having said that, I may have given this to you. I definitely encourage active mobility for hip extension. So you can just Google, and there's probably not a wrong version. I have a 5-way hip drive. Actually, I think you can put it in YouTube and find me doing that. But all it is active movement, trying to encourage some of that. But really the bigger solution tends to be strengthening the opposing muscles oftentimes.
What's your YouTube channel?
My YouTube channel is not useful, but if you put, I think it is Run Free PT.
Okay.
But if you put in Run Free PT and 5-way hip drive, you will find that is useful, because even though that video is a few years old now, I give that mobility exercise to most of my clients, whether it's back pain, neck pain, shoulder pain, knee pain. It's an effective movement drill for almost everybody. So anybody could go find it and try it and do it every morning before you leave the house or before you go out hiking or exercising, and you'll start to feel better. I'd call it a somewhat of a mobility exercise and somewhat of a like nervous system primer to get your body ready to move. So.
At Christini's asks, what's the best way to prevent shin splints, which I think is pretty common in the backpacking world.
Yeah. Well, shin splints are a great issue. The most obvious and true answer is a better buildup and better training. So shin splints are really, we've studied them for years and don't have a complete grasp on them, unfortunately, but it seems they're caused by insufficient preparation overall. Certainly there's overtraining and other things that cause them. So in an ideal world, what you do is you build up more slowly over a longer period of time. I could use myself as a perfect example. When I graduated college and just got sick of getting beat up in a wrestling room, I decided the next hard thing to do was running. And I started running and took on marathons and all this other stuff. And I got shin splints for years. And we tried, I didn't know, I wasn't a PT at the time. I didn't know any better. I tried orthotics and all these other things. But in the end, over the years of training, they slowly went away. And if I look back on that picture, it's a pretty typical snapshot that my body got used to those forces. And the problem is you can build up enough strength in the muscles and enough aerobic fitness to outwork your joints and your ligaments and your other kind of connective tissue that there's no substitute for time and consistency. So that's not the happy answer, but that's probably the best answer. The other solution would, in a more condensed manner, I would train strength. Again, lower leg strength, so calf raises, deadlifts and squats will activate your calves, nothing else if you're going heavy. That kind of strength versus what you're typically doing if you're training just out hiking or something, or even loading and hiking, is you're just wearing those things out, so you're beating yourself up instead of solving the problem. But yeah, kettlebell swings, again, you're asking for a lot of strength and stability in that lower leg, and so you will help the process there. But shin splints are a major problem, and you can try orthotics, like if you've got shin splints and you're just trying to suck it up to get through something, but ultimately it's a training issue is what we see more often than not.
Interesting. Would not have guessed that.
Yeah.
I highlighted a row. I think we should make this the last question so we're not completely dominating Freeborn's time.
I'm good, so whatever. Yeah.
Well, my thought is we're going to have you back on at different times, so we've got enough meat on the bone to tackle. Yeah.
I don't know if mine's showing the highlight. I keep checking every time I see you type, but I'm not. Like every time I'm like, what is he doing?
Maybe I'm offline or something. Okay.
I think I might be offline. I'm not sure. One of us is.
Okay. Well, if there's one that you particularly like, maybe we'll do 2 questions then.
No, that's okay. Just do whatever when you highlight.
Okay. People will shoot me if I don't ask about this subject because I think this is the most common thing in the thru-hiking world is feet issues.
Yeah.
So I'll just run through the list of it. You can kind of take it whatever direction you want, but people want to know what stretches, exercises someone should focus on. People want to know specifically about heel pain, and plantar fasciitis was another question. So I don't know if those are different answers or if you can encompass the whole foot thing into one.
Yeah, I mean, those are tough issues, right? Because those become chronic really quickly and become really hard to solve. But I think one of the solutions is you've got to get a foot that's mobile and strong. And so one solution is to train, at least in a strength manner, barefoot, because you start to use your foot a lot more. Your foot's unprepared. Again, it's the same as shin splints. Your foot's unprepared for the challenge you're putting it through, and so it's getting beat up. And then you're creating this tendinous issue and pain that is really hard to get rid of. If you go into most PTs with plantar fasciitis, like rest and ice is the solution, but that doesn't help you. So honestly, over-the-counter orthotics, just a cushion one to help the symptoms, and then training that foot to get the foot stronger. Mobility, again, the ankle mobility things comes into play. I wouldn't think about just pure calf stretching, but more of how can I actively mobilize my ankles? And again, I like the squat. I also do something called an inchworm, where basically you inch your way up to hands on the floor and then back out and ankle walk your way back up, because you're just creating motion there. But what we need to do is create good ankle mobility, get the nervous system to relax. Ultimately, if you've got plantar fasciitis, you've got a torn tendon under your foot that it's torn and inflamed. Don't go get a cortisone shot, irregardless of what. One of the risk factors there is complete rupture, so not worth the risk.
We knew a guy on the AT, this old guy. He used to make us laugh. He told us that he went into town every time there was a town and got a cortisone shot.
Yeah, terrible idea, right? Like, but yeah. Dry needling can be effective for something like that. I certainly dry needle. That feels about as good as it sounds. I will dry needle the bottom of the foot, but really the best solution, and it becomes this broken record, and we were talking about this beforehand, is to strengthen everything surrounding that area. That's going to cause a long-term solution, and long-term that will solve more of the problem than anything else will. If you're in the midst of those symptoms, padding will help. I mean, that's the reality. And the heel pain is either probably plantar fasciitis, or it often could be fat pad atrophy, so that truly the fat pad in your heel is deteriorating, and it just happens to some of us for whatever reason. The best solution there, again, becomes like, go buy a Dr. Scholl's from Walmart or something and stick a gel insole. Like, it sounds super simple, and it is. You're just trying to manage symptoms until the inflammation goes away. But you've created this inflammation that you're walking on, so it's a really hard problem to solve without a lot of rest or someone really guiding the process.
So is that a vote for potentially easing into minimalist shoes before a Thru-Hike?
That's interesting. Yeah. So in we could have a whole nother podcast on minimalist shoes. Here's the reality. Like, we've both got newborns. Have you watched your kids' feet? Like, I stood my baby up. She's 2.5 months old, and her toes turn white. She grips the table so hard. That's what your feet are supposed to be doing. They're supposed to be working. So I wouldn't Thru-Hike with minimalist shoes unless you wanted to, but that's not what I would encourage. But I would encourage using them in training sparingly. So I would probably start you off going barefoot in a park for a mile, and then put your shoes on and go do your normal, and then keep doing things like that, because what we want is that foot to work better. And most of our shoes now, I love Ultras because they've solved some of that problem. They've opened that shoe up enough that when I put on my first pair of Ultras and went for a run, my foot was sore afterwards. And like, that's weird and super cool, because it means my foot actually got to do something. Whereas most of our shoes are kind of collapsing your foot and just making it a worthless little piece of nothing. Yeah. So yes, barefoot minimalist stuff can help, but unless you have never put on a pair of shoes, I probably wouldn't go minimalist for a Thru-Hike. I would train as intermittently in a minimalist / barefoot way, and then use the tools you have to help boost yourself for this long expedition you're going on.
What about like balancing exercises? Will that strengthen the foot?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So things as simple as, or if you're lucky enough to live on a beach and walk in the sand, like stuff like that, or you can order, and every PT clinic has this little Airex pad, but you could just stand on a pillow barefoot on one foot, and that's going to force the foot to work. So all the things like that where you feel the foot working, and going barefoot at home. I mean, the more you can go barefoot, the better. If you've got bad plantar fasciitis, like, it can be at a point where you can't even go barefoot. You're just aggravating. And many PTs, and maybe rightfully so, if you go see them at that point, will say, well, wear your shoes all the time. You're trying to alleviate the symptoms, because part of the challenge at that point is we've got to get the symptoms down before we can heal you. But you're not solving the problem until you get that foot actually doing its job. I mean, it's amazing. We buy new tires for our cars and spend all this money and know how important they are, but we think a shoe is the solution. But at our feet, like, everything starts at the foot, especially as a hiker. Like, all your body weight, every step you take is going through single leg stance. So you're standing on one leg and starting in that foot. So your toes got to move, your foot's got to grip, you've got to be able to cycle over. There's a lot going on. And yet we wear these shoes and protect our feet so much that they're super weak. But if you go do a Thru-Hike, at some point your foot's worn out and your shoes are worn out, and suddenly like your foot needs to do more than it's trained to do. And so that's why you end up there. And unfortunately it's not a simple, there's not a simple solution. Once you've created that inflammation, it becomes a challenging process to solve, especially if you want to stay active and solve it.
So I think the takeaway theme that I've noticed with pretty much all of these answers, with exceptions, is strength. Strength is the underlying thing for all of this.
Yeah, I mean, that's it, right? So like you said it half jokingly, sitting at our computers, we are a weak society. I mean, it's just a fact. Like even as an active athlete type person, most of us sit at our desk for 8 or 10 hours a day and then go jam for an hour super hard. Like that's our training model. That's a terrible training model. That's an inactive, totally inactive, sedentary lifestyle. That is not an effective strategy. Yeah. So being consistently active, creating a movement program that's consistent over time. But again, we are all so far below the bar of how strong just functional humans should be. And then you want to go hike for months on end, like with a pack on, and probably less than ideal nutrition in the end, right? Like if you're not super strong, then you're unprepared for the experience and you're going to end up beat up. Now, do you survive that beat up and make it to the end? Maybe, maybe not. Or maybe you just suck it up and deal with all the injuries and then come out beat up. But yeah, that strength is such a solution for, physical strength, mental, spirit. I mean, for all of our life issues, I think strength is more than just physical. But yeah, physically, if you get stronger, and again, going back to this company that I wish they didn't steal the name, because strong first is so meaningful. If you get strong first, then we can talk about your tight calves. Like, are they really causing an issue? But if you're a little weak person, let's get you strong and see if you actually still have pain and issues. Because I'm going to guess you won't. Like, your issues will go away.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would say that, and we talked about this before, like it sounds like a broken record, but it's easier said than done to get strong without getting injured, especially with all the crap on, like if you YouTube how to get strong, you're going to have all kinds of gurus and niche people with all these dumb ideas. Honestly, if it's creative and unique and like super exciting, it's probably wrong.
Yeah.
Like find someone that's going to teach you how to squat and deadlift and press and carry and don't do anything else. And then it'll free you up to go hike and do what you want to do. So
this has been very enlightening. Would you agree?
Yes, I've learned very much.
Yeah, good. Freeborn, thank you so much. Please let people know where they should go to check out your clinic, find you online, like the services that you offer, all of that.
Cool. So, well, thanks for having me. This has been super fun actually for me as well. So my clinic name is Run Free PT. If you go to runfreept.com, you can kind of see a rundown of who I am, what I'm doing, and all my Instagram and stuff is the same. It's not necessarily very business minded for following, but you can.
A lot of baby pictures.
There's lots of baby pictures and dog pictures. But I do, like I said, and this is truly a service out there that I wanted to offer, and I do. There's free consults, whether it's video or if you're local in person, for anybody that has questions about some of this and wants to follow up. You can also feel free to email me on the email address on there. It's runfreept@gmail.com. So I'm super responsive to giving feedback. And I mean, my goal as a practice is to empower you to take care of yourself. So if you need more than that, then I'll pitch you more and give you my idea of what would make the most sense. But if you just need a consult to answer some questions and get you headed in the right direction, like, that's a privilege for me to be able to offer that to you. So
somebody's in the middle of the Thru-Hike and like the question of should they push through it or should they?
I mean, truly, yeah. Like if you have the opportunity to go online and just kind of reach out to me, I'm happy to respond to that.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I have a feeling your inbox is about to get flooded. So.
Nice.
But yeah, honestly, thank you so much for your time. Like I said, there's still a ton of questions here, both of our own and from listeners. So definitely got to get you back on to tackle these again.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah. Thank you so much for doing this.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.